So here on FTD Facts, we've done a lot of videos on different aspects of the armed forces of not just every other country, but specifically Sweden. I've talked about how powerful the country is from a military perspective, and about the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Special Forces group as well. Which, by the way, if any of you guys are interested in those, keep an eye out in the cards in this video for those playlists on Sweden's military. But today, in this video, you and I are going to learn as much as we can about the army, specifically the ground forces of Sweden. What's up, guys? Dave Wapple here, and welcome to another awesome video here on FTD Facts. All my military people who are just loving this military content, thanks for coming back and watching a new video. Me, I'm loving learning about Sweden, and I'm loving learning about military, which, by the way, guys, I feel like I'm starting to get a little thin on my military Sweden topic, so if you guys got any suggestions on stuff that you guys would like to see, let me know down there in the comments section below. But anyways, let's get started. If, by the way, you are liking this video and you want more content around Sweden's military, hit the like button, because then I know to continue to do this stuff. So let's start off with some of the basics, and let's be perfectly honest, Sweden's army is one of the oldest, if not the oldest unit in the entire armed forces of Sweden. And not only that, it's also classified as one of the oldest military groups in the entire world. Of course, what I mean, it's the oldest and still going on today, the most continuously long military. You get what I mean. I'm not really good with these words things. I mean, maybe I should just give up on FTD Facts altogether. So for the unit, they began in 1521, which was even a year prior to the introduction of Sweden's official navy. Now, of course, some of you people in Sweden, you guys are people who know a lot about Sweden. You may be saying to yourself, okay, oh, come on, Dave. No, Sweden's had an army from long before that, and that is true. However, truth be told, a lot of people just identify the founding date as the year of 1521, as it was the beginning of the Swedish War of Liberation, which was started when Gustav Vasa, who actually also had a ship named after him known as the Vasa, which, by the way, to correct myself, in my Navy video, it sunk on its, inaugural voyage. At least that's what you guys are telling me, but anyways, let's get back to the army. But for Gustav and his rebel group, they decided they wanted to be their own government and fought against Denmark and Norway. Norway. Don't ask what happened there. Did I really just call Norway Norway? You read things and it just comes out so quick. Sorry, Norwegians out there. I know there might be a few of you guys watching. Either way, this was a part of a group called the Kalmar Union, and Sweden didn't really want to be a part of that. Of course, prior to 1521, Sweden did have land forces. They weren't really identified as an army. I mean, you could classify the Vikings and their conquest of the world as pretty much a land force, and even a naval force too. That's right, because those Norse ships were bad. And of course, to give you very specific details about the army is kind of hard to do because it's hard to go back that far. But here is a list of some of the wars that the ground forces of Sweden took part of. For example, in 1015 to 1018, there was the Norwegian-Sweden War, which happened again also 90 years later. On top of that, there was also the Swedish Crusades to Finland, which, by the way, a lot of people think that the first crusade, which was in about 1150 AD, a lot of people think that that was more or less a myth. But there was also a second Swedish crusade that happened in 1249, and a third one happening in 1293. Which, during the third one, there was a major attack of the Viborg Castle, in which land forces basically won the battle, and Sweden ended up ruling over Karelia for over 400 years. As well, moving a little bit more forward, there was also the Danish-Swedish War, which began in 1470 to 71. And probably one of the biggest ones to mention was the Russo-Swedish War from 1495 to 1497. On top of that, there was also the Second Dano-Swedish War that lasted from 1501 to 1512. And of course, that is just a brief summary. There was a lot of wars that Sweden took part of. But moving up to the army's foundation date, which is in 1521 during the Swedish Liberation War, it was estimated that during that time, Sweden had approximately 12,000 troops. Now, I'm not sure if this is necessarily Navy or ground forces, but I can estimate that a majority of them were on the ground. And to give you an idea, throughout this War of Liberation, they were against 27,000 troops and ended up winning the war with less than 4,000 casualties. So there you go, that's just a little bit of a history of kind of the army prior to 1521. However, moving a little bit forward to 1814, this was a very important war, because this was the last war for a long time that Sweden's army and other armed forces took part in offensive measures during a war. As a matter of fact, the army was not realistically used in other countries around the world until 1961. This was known as the Campaign Against Norway, and as a matter of fact, to give you an idea of all the wars that Sweden had been a part of that they currently know, including this War of 1814 and the Liberation War of 1521, the Sweden Army has been in no less than 26 wars or engagements. And if you were to ask how many engagements Sweden has been a part of, to date, 2019, Sweden's army has been a part of at least 29 engagements throughout its history. Now, okay, I just want to roll this video back just a tiny bit, and I want to talk about World War I and World War II. First of all, I like to mention these two wars within all of my military videos, simply due to the fact that a lot of people don't have an understanding of what Sweden was like during that time, or those times. The reason is because a lot of people have the idea that just because Sweden was neutral, it didn't do much throughout the war. And although that might be true, I think it's very important that we look at what Sweden was doing during the two biggest conflicts of the 20th century. Now, due to what is known as the Defense Bill in 1914, Sweden upped their army infantry divisions from 6 to 12. And one of the hard things is to identify how many combat-ready troops there were available within Sweden during the First World War. Some reports have estimated that they had approximately 200,000 troops, but with also not enough supplies and people to lead them, it's said that Sweden kept no more than 13,000 troops in arms. However, during World War I, Sweden sent a lot of officers into the Western Front to learn the type of combat that was happening. But however, I should mention that during the Finnish Civil War, that was from January to May of 1918, there was approximately 200 officers and 400 NCOs that volunteered to assist Finland. Again, not sure if that is Army, Air Force, and all that stuff, but you could probably guess that a majority of that is ground forces. Now, of course, World War II came around and things were a lot different. They had a lot more heightened security. As a matter of fact, in my video about the Air Force, I was really impressed to find out that during that time, Sweden had like the third largest Air Force in the entire world. But as for the army, their numbers at their peak was approximately 300,000 troops. Now, many of these troops were put along the coast and borders to prevent invasions, and although it says that their numbers jumped, they believe that it never went below 25,000 troops. But during World War II, the army adopted weapons such as the KPIST M45, which is basically their version of a submachine gun. There was also the well-known Sweden Mauser, called for many the Gewehr M96, and as well the KGM-40 light machine gun. All of these, which of course were Swedish made. Interesting to know. Also, during the beginning of the Second World War, Sweden was still using a lot of horses for transportation. However, things didn't stay this way because in 1939, at the beginning of the war, they had one armored division with approximately 29 fighting vehicles or tanks. However, by the end of the war, the amount of tanks and heavy armored vehicles they had grew to 795. Quite a bit. Also, during World War II in 1940, they created what is now known as one of the largest groups within, I guess, the ground forces, but not necessarily the army of Sweden, and that is the Home Guard. Now, these guys are pretty much your first responders. They respond to catastrophes that happen within the country, and of course, they act as a reserve unit for Sweden. And in today's world, the Home Guard alone has approximately 22,000 soldiers, comprising of 40 battalions. But like I said, I'm just mentioning that because they are classified as a land force, but they're not theoretically part of the Army department. One of the major reasons is because they have two different commanders. I mean, they're all under one big command, but two separate ones that they answer to. At least this is from my understanding. This is where it got a little bit confusing. Basically, to go into details, in 1975, the monarch of Sweden was the formal head of the army. In today's world, however, it is Carl Engelbrektsson. As for the army itself, it's said that in 2014, there was roughly 50,000 soldiers that are full-time and part-time, which was also a goal they wanted to achieve by 2020. During the Cold War and the rest of the army, conscription was a major part that accounted for 85% of the males who were in service. FYI, conscription actually does exist today for all divisions within the armed forces, and it's also applied to females as well. Also, although this isn't a major fact, but it is kind of important, in 2018, Sweden did something with its army that it hadn't done in 40 years. And that was a mobilization of all its forces in a test operation, and this happened on June 6th, which is also Sweden's National Day. Like I said, it's not really a mind-blowing fact because they just kind of went on patrols and did other sort of test operations. But it's good to know that Sweden is doing things to keep its army going. But in today's world, let's take a look at some of the different divisions that are within the army itself. Basically, one of the first ones that I want to talk about is the lifeguards, which is not what you think it is. It's not like lifeguards like, you know, in a swimming pool. They're watching out for people. They're called the lifeguards. They are an actual army unit. These guys have been around since 2000, and they are classified as a cavalry infantry regiment. There's also the Life Regiment Hussars, which is one of the oldest military groups in all of Europe. It's quite impressive. This group is classified as a light mobile unit, and they also have a paratrooper department, and they've been around since at least 1536. On top of that, there is the Skaborg Armored Brigade and many other infantry units. There is also the Norrbotten Regiment, which specializes in army infantry and commando Arctic combat units. There is also air defense, artillery, and the South Scania Armored Regiment. Also, for the Special Forces SOG, you guys might be curious, are these guys under the army? Well, not necessarily, because these guys operate directly under the Supreme Commander of Sweden's Armed Forces, and that is General Michael Biden. Speaking of armored divisions, let's take a look at some of the vehicles that the army does use. Unlike other European countries that are phasing out tanks, Sweden does have their very own version of the Leopard 2A4 and the Leopard 2A5. And these two are classified as the Striv or STRV 121 and the 122. And basically in total, they say they have approximately 122 of all of these tanks. On top of that, they use the Piranha 3C and the Patria AMV and the Patria Passy as armored personnel carriers. And if you've been paying attention to my previous videos, you would already know that the CV90 is their major infantry fighting vehicle, and it's made in Sweden. It's a good vehicle. And basically, they have over 354 of these alone. They got a lot of them. And last but not least, let's take a look at some of the actual handhelds that the army uses. When we talk about the infantry of Sweden's army, they actually have two main rifles, which are basically their own version of the G3A3 known as the AK-4, and their very own version of the FNC known as the AK-5. They also have their own version of the light machine gun known as the FN Minimi and the FN Maj, or MAG, or MAG, MAG, I don't really know how to pronounce that. But these are the KSP-58 and the KSP-90s. And of course, a bunch of other equipment that I'm not going to go into because I just like talking about the main stuff. But either way, guys, that is me looking at the Army of Sweden. I love going into some of the historical aspects, as you know, and some of the modern aspects. So I hope you guys got a general understanding of this great military. Well, military division, you know what I mean. But either way, guys, my name's Dave Wapple. Thanks for tuning in. And by the way, if you are really liking this sort of content and you want to check out more Sweden military topics, well, I got a playlist and it's been in the cards. I'll probably just put one up here right now that you guys can check out. There is also another video segment that you can check out, or a video playlist segment, and that is just on the country itself. I've learned many great things about Sweden and what makes the country awesome, so feel free to check those out as well. And if you don't want to hit the cards, they're just going to be at the end of the video or in the description box below, whatever you guys feel like, man. Also, because I feel like I'm running really low on some of the military topics in Sweden, if you guys have any ideas, I mean, I do have some stuff in the back of my head. This brain is wild. Let me know down there in the comment section below some of your recommendations. Hit that like button if you like this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. If not, you have a fantastic day. Okay. Time to go to the bathroom. Bye. Woo! Alright, so here are those playlists that I was telling you about. Check them out, guys. They are really awesome. We've gone into great details of all the military divisions. And of course, I'm not done yet. I'm gonna just keep talking about it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.